welcome to the monthly book seminar series that is organized by the Hate Program for International Cybersecurity at Leiden University. We're still waiting for people to join in, but in the interest of time, let's get started. Let me, before we have Shannon Vallor to talk about her latest book, let me tell you a little bit about the Hate Program book series, if this is the first time that you're joining us. We do this every month, and usually, if not always, it's focused on a new publication, a new book that is out from a scholar or oftentimes a practitioner in the fields of cybersecurity, internet governance, AI, and sometimes on lethal autonomous weapons systems. As you can figure out, the canvas of topics that are part of the seminar series is quite broad, and we cover from within these topics a wide range of issues, ranging from security, political economy, ethics, law, and of course, international relations, broadly defined. And we already have, if I'm not mistaken, a full roster of speakers confirmed for this, the second half of this year. First of all, welcome to the new academic year. And so if if you're not already part of our mailing list, please do join it so that you can, know who is lined up for October, November, and December this year. And I think we already have speakers confirmed for January and February. So, and these are exciting books, works of scholarship, much like what we have on store for you today. And so please do sign up and be part of our mailing list so that you know what interests you and what doesn't. And with that, a short spiel about the Hate Program book series, let me now introduce Shannon Vallor, who's our scholar who's presenting her latest work today. Shannon is the Bailey Gifford Chair in the Ethics of Data and AI at the Edinburgh Futures Institute at the University of Edinburgh, where she also has an appointment in the philosophy department. She directs the Center for Techno-Moral Futures at the Futures Institute and is the co-director of the UKRI's Bridging Responsible AI Divides program. She is the author of Technology and the Virtues, a philosophical guide to a future worth wanting, which is published by OUP in 2016, and more recently of The AI Mirror, Reclaiming Our Humanity in an Age of Machine Thinking, which is the book that she is going to talk about today. Although if you have, we often have authors who've written a number of works. So if you have questions about, her previous work, feel free to talk about it in the Q&A that follows the presentation. But Professor Vallor's new book, The AI Mirror, is a diagnosis of the threat to our humanity posed by today's generative AI technologies, which is not quite the way that conventional narrative sort of has brought forth to us. And the book is actually an exposure of how, of course, how AI really works, but while making somewhat in a fascinating but also in an ambitious way a case for what AI could be. According to the book, a way to reclaim our human potential for moral and intellectual growth rather than lose ourselves in mirrors of the past. And I think while reading, of course, what Shannon has written previously and also parts of this book, what really struck to me as interesting is the fact that as an international relations scholar, I often rely on analogies drawn from the past as an example to illustrate the promise and the perils of the future. And at least from where I stand, Shannon Vallor's book seems to be challenging that model of perhaps excessive and mistaken reliance on the past, including of historical analogies. And so I'm very much looking forward to her presentation today on the book and to the Q&A that follows. Usually how we do this is the book presenter talks for about 20 to 30 minutes. So Shannon is going to share her screen for the presentation, and then we can have a Q&A. The Q&A is, feel free to, of course, unmute yourself, show yourself, reveal yourself, and raise a question. But if you feel shy, you can always present your questions on the chat that we have on Zoom. Feel free to do it either way. But without further ado, let me hand it over to Shannon, who I think is going to share her screen. But Shannon, welcome, and we're looking forward to this.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to speak to the program. So I'm really excited to start the conversation. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully that's going to work okay. All right, so this is normally a bit of a longer talk, but just to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion, I'm going to move through sections of it rather quickly. But hopefully the talk, which is intended for as wide an audience as possible, will be accessible even at that pace. So today and in my book, I speak to many familiar topics for those of us who work in the area of AI ethics. Things like unjust bias in AI models, the lack of transparency and accountability in AI tools, the questionable safety and reliability of generative AI models in particular. But I do this in the book in a new way by using a metaphor that helps us cut through the AI hype cycle to understand what this type of AI today is and isn't. I focus on a particular class of AI tools. So this talk is not about all AI. It's about, in particular, the kind of AI that's trained on large volumes of human data in order to show how today's most commercially powerful tools captivate and confound us, endangering not human survival, perhaps, but something nearly as important, and that's our shared belief in human agency and potential. So let's start by, sorry, this is the cover of the book, in case you're curious. It was released on June 3rd and is available at Oxford University Press, should you want to seek it out. So let's consider the fact that all technology is a mirror, not just AI, right? All technologies are extensions of human values and imagination into the built world. Every technology, from the wheel to the book to the engine to the digital computer, reflects what humans at certain times and places thought was worth doing or worth making, worth enabling, or worth trying. But AI today is a mirror of an especially powerful sort. So we can think of AI as a mirror in this way. So if you understand the physics of a mirror and the components of a mirror, you need a flat material surface that is more than a flat plane. It needs a special kind of reflective coating. And in fact, it's the physical properties of that coating on the glass mirror that determine the powers of the mirror to reflect and perform in the way that we want. And also the way that the surface of that mirror is polished also determines the functionality of the mirror, what level of distortion it has or magnification. So what I want you to think about with AI is I want you to think about the machine learning algorithm that is embedded in an AI model. I want you to think about that as the AI mirror's surface. It's the properties of that algorithm, the mathematical and structural properties of that algorithm, that determine its performance in the same way that the physical properties of a mirror coating and its polished surface determine its performance and its reflective properties. Okay. So the algorithm then, and we can consider that to involve both the learning algorithm that we start with, and then the trained algorithm that has been modified by exposure to the data, right? You can think of that trained machine learning model itself as the final surface of the mirror. Now I want you to think about the other components of a mirror. Mirrors don't work without light. They need light to be collected by that surface in order to be able to reflect anything at all. So what is the light, or the metaphorical equivalent of light, for an AI model? It's data, right? It's, instead of shining beams of light onto glass surfaces, we shine massive beams, troves of human-generated data onto these algorithmic surfaces. So we've got at least two of the three central components of a mirror. We've got the coded surface. We have the thing that falls on that surface. And we need the outputs, the equivalent of reflected images that appear in the mirror. And those, of course, are just the outputs of a trained machine learning model. It's predictions, it's classifications, it's depictions. If it's an image model, it's the paintings or the photographs or the sketches that it throws up for us. If it's a language model that's text-based, it's the words and sentences and essays that appear in that algorithmic mirror. Okay, so hopefully the basic structure of the metaphor is clear. And as I go on in the talk, I think you'll see, and as the book explores in greater depth, all of the features that we're used to thinking about in mirrors, reflection, distortion, occlusion, magnification, also appear in AI mirrors. And we're seeing the power of these algorithmic mirrors expand and intrude in some ways into our lives, more so now than ever. Because in a few short years, we've made leaps forward by constructing ever larger AI mirrors like GPT and Gemini, large language models that gather virtually all the light, all the human-generated data that we possess in digital form. And multimodal versions of these models now incorporate the light of our images, our videos, and our voices, not just the light of our words or our texts. So from this collected light, our AI mirrors are now projecting an eerily lifelike and animated image of humanity. Except, of course, the image that appears in these mirrors is not an image of humanity as a whole, right? Because that light that falls on it is not representative of humanity as a whole. It's most representative of the small subset of largely English-speaking, although not exclusively so, digitally connected humanity that is most represented in the digital corpus of the internet. It is heavily weighted towards the words and images and judgments of men, of those in the global north, and of those that enjoy the privilege of wealth and social status. So those are the features of humanity that we see reflected most commonly in these images. One of the things that I think is really striking, though, is that despite the fact that it doesn't reflect all of us, the image of humanity that performs in this mirror, that dances in this mirror, can be very compelling, very seductive. It can very much capture our imagination. And we know, for example, that some users already believe they find themselves in the presence of another mind, another consciousness on the other side of the machine mirror. So it is very possible and very common increasingly that when we talk to ChatGPT or its cousins or a romance chatbot, right, that we imagine that we are in the presence of some incredible new kind of mind that we've given birth to, that we're talking to a second kind of creature, a second kind of life. But again, if we can go back to understanding how these images of intelligence are produced, we realize that we're not talking to a mind. We're not talking to another consciousness. We're talking to a digital ghost, a ghost of our collective selves or some subset of ourselves. It's a kind of phantom image that is cast by this mirror. So think about the fact that when you go to your, the mirror in your bathroom in the morning or in your bedroom, and you see your face staring back at you, you don't get confused and believe that there's a second body in the bathroom with you. You don't believe that there's a second body on the other side of the glass, right? You know, in fact, that that's a flat image being projected, that even though it moves with you, right, and follows your rhythms, you know that in fact it is only a very sort of superficial projection of the real thing, the real body that's only on this side of the mirror. It's really important that we understand this in the same way when we're talking to AI mirrors, right? That we're not talking to a second mind or a second intelligence, that what we're talking to is a reflection, a superficial reflection of intelligence, in the same way that in the morning when I talk to myself in the mirror, I'm just talking to an image of myself. But, if we think of the Google engineer Blake Lemoine, who, in testing an early version of Google's large language model Lambda, it became convinced that he was talking to a conscious being with rights and desires and a soul. It's very easy to realize how powerful the illusion of intelligence can be in these mirrors. And in those cases, where something like the Roman poet Ovid's young Narcissus, right? If you know the myth from Ovid's Metamorphoses of Narcissus and Echo, Narcissus was seduced and held captive by his own image in a reflecting pool in which he saw not himself, or he thought he wasn't looking at himself. In fact, he was, but he didn't recognize his own image in the reflective pool. He thought he was talking to another beautiful boy in the water. And Ovid says of Narcissus, he loves a bodiless dream. He thinks that a body that is only a shadow. Well, when we talk to AI mirrors and forget that we're talking to a reflection, we are very much like Narcissus, right? We think something that is a mind that is only a shadow or a reflection. Now, we know that it didn't end very well for Narcissus, right? Narcissus loses himself, loses care for his own body and life. He dies by the side of that pool in his obsession with that beautiful boy gazing back at him in the water that he's trying to communicate with. Ovid says, what he has seen, he does not understand, but what he sees, he is on fire for. So my book asks the question, can we avoid the same fate as Narcissus? And if so, how? There's also a digression in my book about the other character in that book, in that story, Echo, who actually, I think, has an equivalent in the story of ourselves in AI. But I'm going to pass over that part and just leave it to you in case you would like to read the book yourself. But the book asks this question: what happens to our humanity when all that we can see is its reflection? Okay, so that's the prelude. Let's try to understand just a little bit better what mirrors do and how they can help us understand what generative AI tools in particular do. So of course, mirrors reveal things, right? They can reflect far more than our words and voices. They can reflect our faces, our bodies, our decisions, and reveal a lot more about these things than we would otherwise know. In particular, these tools reflect and reveal patterns that recur in our data, patterns that can be highly significant, right? And this is how AI tools can tell us if a pattern in our mammogram indicates cancerous tissue. And soon we might even use it to reveal patterns that predict cancer before it arrives. We can use it to reveal patterns that indicate whether we're at high risk of sepsis and need closer medical monitoring, something that can and already has saved lives. We can use it to reveal the patterns within the proteins that make up our bodies and other organic material in the living world, and use that to help engineer new treatments, new pharmaceuticals, new biomedical discoveries. We can use it to identify new classes of antibiotics, without which we are likely to see a rapid uptick in deaths from microbes that are resistant to the current class of antibiotics. We can use AI to identify toxic lead pipes in the ground more quickly and efficiently so that they can be removed before they poison permanently the minds of our children. We can use them to clear and identify deadly landmines without having to send humans into dangerous areas with unexploded old military ordnance and put themselves at risk. Okay. But I want you to notice, right, that all of these benefits, which include profound life-saving potential, came from AI tools trained on data that differs from what something like ChatGPT is trained on, right? None of these kinds of AI tools were built with large language models constructed to mirror human minds. They came from very targeted uses of machine learning and data on a specific problem. And again, my book doesn't focus on these so much as it does on looking with a more critical eye at the true benefits and risks of the AI mirrors that claim to be able to perform intelligence and not just reveal things that are of interest to intelligent beings like ourselves. So mirrors don't only reveal things, they magnify them, right? Just like glass mirrors, algorithms are never neutral. They're never perfectly flat and polished. They always magnify select features of our reality while diminishing others. And because they do this, when we use them without care for this property, AI tools not only reproduce, but amplify many of the pervasive harms that already exist in our communities. And we've seen this for years in the problems with the amplification of injustice and unfairness by means of algorithms that are trained on unjust and unfair patterns in human decision-making. So we've seen this in the medical system, where algorithms designed to triage patients and give the highest risk patients the most resources and medical attention actually have done the opposite in some cases by deprioritizing the sickest patients for care simply because of their skin color, not because the algorithms developed some kind of racist intentions of their own, but simply because they were trained on data from a racist medical system in the United States, then allowed that racism to be pushed through into the mirror image, and not only pushed through, but magnified. So if you ask the question, what do you get if you naively train a predictive AI model on an unjust medical system? The answer is you'll get an AI tool that calculates how to be even more efficient at delivering injustice than people were. And this is what we see throughout the AI ecosystem, right? That these tools magnify the patterns that we have already created. We see this in the well-known in the Netherlands child care benefits scandal. We see it in the latest generative AI tools. So those two examples I just gave did not involve generative AI. Those were kind of older, more targeted predictive algorithms. But we see the same sort of biases turning up in tools like GPT-4, right? Where biases, for example, with respect to gender, exaggerated many mispredictions that humans had already made. So basically, women, for example, who presented with the symptoms of a heart attack often get diagnosed instead with something like anxiety or panic disorder, relative to men who don't get that misdiagnosis as often. Well, it turns out that GPT was shown to actually generate the same sorts of biases in its predictions, which again should be unsurprising, right? These are not independent medical judgments that GPT is making. It is a reflection of the patterns found in the judgments we've already made, which we know are often biased and unfair. Now, the point that I want to make and that I emphasize throughout the book is that what that means is that these tools are actually quite conservative in their function and even regressive in their function. What I mean by regressive is they bring forward the past. They take the patterns of the past and bring them forward in the form of prediction and automation. So I want you to think about the fact that these tools are marketed to us as the future, when in fact, what they often do is make the future more like the past than it would otherwise be. And it's interesting because all glass mirrors actually show us the past. That's because of the nature of light and the time it takes to travel. Anytime you look in a mirror, this image here is produced by a mirror. The James Webb Telescope, right, is a giant bunch of mirrors in space. And what the mirrors do is gather light from the early days of the universe, and thus they show us a snapshot of the universe, but back in time. AI mirrors do something very similar with human history. They collect all of the light from our digitized records of human decision-making and culture. They find the strongest patterns, which are, of course, the ones that have been repeated most often, and therefore the ones that have the longest history. And then they carry those patterns forward as predictions and decisions about what we will do today and tomorrow. So we see examples of that in images produced by image models like Stable Diffusion. When you ask for a depiction of a CEO, right? It's been a long time since all CEOs, every single one of them, looked like this, right? There are still not very many women CEOs, not still very many CEOs who are not of white or European heritage. But there are some, but when you first start engaging with these models, you see that the images that they give us are older and more biased even than our present reality. The same sorts of thing happens if you ask Stable Diffusion for a depiction of an artist, right? How long has it been since this is what artists look like? It's not only that they're men or European men, right? It's that most of them look like they are sitting in a studio from the 17th, 18th, or 19th century, right? You don't see 20th century artist tools here in this image. Likewise, if you ask for images of hospitals in Africa, you get these images that are not only absurd, see the giraffe in the operating room, right? But incredibly regressive in what they depict. And there are other ways in which AI brings back the past, right? You can take the past of your relationship with your former partner and reanimate that partner in a chatbot form. And of course, it's not an accident that that partner here in the advertisement is gendered as a she, right? So what I want to say here is that I think when we think about these tools as innovation, I think we're actually fooling ourselves, right? It's not innovation. It's not even prediction. It's the past eating the future. It's taking the past and pushing it forward and keeping it going instead of enabling us to more easily change course, right? You might wonder, why are all these tools only selling us different versions of the past? Well, it's because what the AI companies have to sell, all they have is our past data. They don't have any information about what we might do next that we haven't done before. But that means our AI models don't either. And that's incredibly significant, particularly if we rely on these models to automate what happens next. Okay. Like all mirrors, the special properties of AI mirrors don't just magnify, they distort. And we've begun to see that already, right? In some of the biases that are produced, which don't even reflect the biases we have today. They're exaggerated and distorted. And it's fine that mirrors distort. Sometimes that's even useful, right? Look at this example. This is a mirror that distorts. And yet we create a little warning on the mirror as a guardrail to ensure that we don't rely on the distortion to be faithful in ways that might endanger us. But we don't have those warnings and guardrails standardized for AI mirrors yet. And we certainly don't have the kinds of regulatory requirements and incentives needed to ensure that they are used. And that's really harmful when, as I've mentioned, these models kind of pull biases from the past into the present. Just give you, some more incredibly distorted examples of this. If you ask an image model for a person in social services and it gives you a bunch of images like this at the left, you would think that a white person never uses social services. In the United States, which is where most of this training data comes from, the vast majority of people who use social services are actually white. Elderly white people and white people from relatively economically disadvantaged communities. But that's not what this image shows, right? It shows a productive person as all being a young man in his 20s or 30s with relatively similar facial hair and a lot of hair product. It shows attractive people, right, as all young and light-skinned. Apparently, attractive people somehow all look like this, like sisters. And perhaps an even more disturbing image, right, asking for an image of toys in Iraq and getting these incredibly disturbing kinds of distortions. Even when we try to make models less distorted, they often just produce distortions of a different sort, right? As the Gemini model that Google produced did when it had been trained to be more diverse in its outputs. And what it ended up doing is giving us these distorted images of dark-skinned and Asian Nazis. Okay. I want to point out that mirrors don't just distort and reveal, they also confound us. They're tools of both the entertainer and the charlatan. Here's an example of the entertainer, right? We all recognize Balenciaga Pope. But it was also, something that deceived a lot of people. And today, when you go on Facebook or any other site that is populated with AI-generated content, you notice a lot of people talking about the fact that they don't believe anything to be real there anymore. And even genuine, authentic images. I saw one recently of a whale in California off the coast swimming under a group of surfers. It was genuine drone footage from a few years ago that I remember seeing. And I lived in that area once, and I know that those whales do travel right under the surfers right off the shore. But the comments were full of people saying, this is just AI-generated garbage. Why are we even looking at this? Right. So the confounding effect of AI mirrors really takes us away from being able to grapple with questions of reality and truth. Sometimes it's ridiculous, like this, when, the AI bot on Twitter is claiming that the mayor has ordered the police into the subways to shoot the earthquake that just happened before it strikes again, right? This is just nonsense. But no one was laughing when, back in April, the same bot was creating fake headlines like Iran strikes Tel Aviv with heavy missiles right in the middle of an emerging war. And so we cannot afford these kinds of mistakes. We cannot afford chatbots that tell businesses that it's legal to, in fact, discriminate against groups that are, in fact, protected by law in New York City, right? And yet New York City's AI chatbot had essentially erased those protections by telling businesses that they were perfectly entitled to discriminate in these ways. We've got AI tools that can reanimate or steal the voices of your loved ones so that you can get a call from them, maybe even a video call of them crying and sobbing with their face scratched and bloodied, asking for financial bailout from an emergency. How will you know, right? I've had to create a code word with my mother so that if she gets a call from me that sounds like me, that she knows a code word to ask to make sure that it really is me. What's the cost of having to do that for every relationship and every transaction that we have in society? And who's paying that cost? OpenAI isn't paying it, I'll tell you that much. Okay, there are a few other aspects of the book that I would like to take you through if we had time. Right, the fact that these mirrors don't just reveal, they also occlude lots of the hidden labor, for example, in the AI ecosystem, the hidden human labor that's devalued by it, that's stolen by it, and then repurposed as machine intelligence. But what I want to close with is some reflections about where we go from here with AI mirrors, right? And I'm going to kind of stop sharing and go into a just kind of mode of conversation that perhaps we can discuss. The fact of the matter is that we can use mirrors in different ways. We can also build AI tools that don't function so much as mirrors. But one of the interesting things I found in my research for the book was that if you look at depictions of the virtue of prudence or practical wisdom in history. There's something really interesting about those images. The figure of prudence is always depicted holding a mirror. I'll just very briefly share again, just to show you what I mean. So you can see, oh, it went back to the whole presentation. Apologies for that. Let's see if I can, there we go. Oh, and of course it damaged the presentation of the slide. Sorry about the technical issues here. I'm trying to fix those. There we go. So you can see these images of prudence holding a mirror. Now, I thought that was really interesting. Some of you might know that my work originally derives from virtue ethics. And the virtue of prudence, or practical wisdom, phronesis in the Greek, right, is the most significant one. It's the virtue that actually makes us and constitutes our intelligence. It's the virtue that takes all of our other virtues and coordinates them in an intelligent way. It's the virtue that goes from habit to wisdom. And I found it really instructive and powerful to think about the fact that the ancients and medieval artists depicted prudence with a mirror. Now, there's a lot of debate about why, what does this signify? But one of the obvious things I think you could imagine is, particularly in the image on the right, where it almost looks as if prudence is not looking at herself in the mirror, but rather looking behind her. And I mentioned that these mirrors are conservative and that they pull the past forward. Well, it's actually quite useful to understand the past. It's quite useful to be able to find patterns in the past that you hadn't seen before. And so one of the things we can think about are, what are the ways that we could use AI mirrors to learn more about the past, but not in order to push those patterns into the future, or to replace our judgment in the present with reliance on that past and repetition of those patterns, but rather as a form of instruction on how to move forward more wisely than we walked in the past. How could we think about, for example, AI mirrors as ways of showing us the unsustainable patterns of consumption and resource use in the past, that instead today we're using AI to amplify and drive across the planet even more aggressively, those patterns of unsustainable consumption, building more and more data centers that are causing tech companies and nations to potentially miss their climate targets for 2030 just because of AI. That's an example of regression, right? We had decided that those targets needed to be met because we couldn't sustain the rate of energy use, of fossil fuel use, particularly of the past. And yet now what AI is doing is driving us to return to those past patterns and abandon those new ambitions that we had set for ourselves. So we have to be able to think about, how can we use AI mirrors differently? How can we use AI mirrors to make us wiser rather than to trap us in the patterns of the past? We can also think about the fact that self-reflection and self-diagnosis has always been one of the functions of mirrors. You see Prudence on the left does seem to be looking at herself, trying to understand herself in that mirror. And we might think about the ways in which AI tools, even generative AI tools, can tell us more about who we have been, so that we can decide who we want to be next. And that's the real message of the book. The real message of the book is optimistic. It's about the future. It's about the power that we still have to create that future, to invent that future, to use the power of art and design and culture and philosophy, and care for one another and care for the planet. How these are all forces that allow us to build futures that haven't existed before, to invent patterns that we haven't created before. And to take those new paths forward rather than the ones that have already ended for us. So I hope you've enjoyed the teaser presentation of the book's narrative, and I'm happy to answer questions or just carry on the discussion in new directions. Thanks very much.